Welcome, everyone. My name is Caroline Player, and on behalf of the Georgia Tech Alumni Association, thank you so much for joining us today. We are in for a treat in our second Grow Fearlessly Conversations with Entrepreneurs. We welcome both Laura Hodgson and Patrick Whaley on the line today to lead us. Before I turn the program over to them, I am going to just give two introductions, and then we'll get right to it. I'll mention first, just by matter of housekeeping, you probably saw my chat item already, but if you will keep yourselves on mute during the course of this presentation, that will be so helpful. We are being recorded, and just to control any background noise, keep yourself on mute, but we welcome this to be interactive and encourage you to use the chat function to submit any questions or comments. This will be about 45 minutes or so, and then we will definitely do Q&A at the end. So just so you're aware, let me introduce Laura first. For those of you who have participated in these programs before, you know our presenter and leader, Laura Hodgson. She is president and CEO of Now Account, and she has launched product and service businesses, raised capital, and served in executive management roles with Nourish, Insomnia Consulting, Dewberry Capital Corporation, Dunk, and IXL. Laura has extensive experience in brand development, corporate strategy, business development, marketing, and operations. She has worked for companies such as Nike, Coca-Cola, the Home Depot, Keds, and others. Laura received an MBA from the Harvard Business School and a bachelor's in aerospace engineering with highest honors from Georgia Tech, where she was a scholarship member of the varsity track team, was named one of the top 20 students in the U.S. by USA Today, and was selected to study in Japan with the U.S. Department of Defense. Laura also served as the ambassador to Lebanon for the 1996 Olympic Games. She's an adjunct instructor in graduate finance classes at Georgia Tech's Scheller College of Business and serves as a founding board member of Atlanta Charter School. Laura has also served on the boards of Flag Bank, Society of International Business Fellows, Central Atlanta Progress, and Georgia Tech's Alexander Tharp Fund. Laura is a member of the Leadership Atlanta class of 2004 and Leadership Georgia class of 2005. She was honored by the Georgia Tech Athletic Association with the Total Person Alumnus Award and by the Georgia Tech Women in Engineering as Alumna of the Year. Laura is a member of the Georgia Tech Young Alumni Hall of Fame and is internationally recognized as a speaker on innovation and creativity. We are so lucky to have her leading us. Patrick Whaley is the founder and chief executive officer of TITIN, Inc. The Georgia-based business was founded in 2005 in his dorm room while going to school full-time. Patrick has conducted extensive research for defined therapeutic usages, negotiated contracts with the athletes and teams of the NCAA, NFL, NBA, MLB, and PGA. As the CEO, he led negotiations for a multi-million-dollar venture capital financing round in 2012. His award-winning product has won over $70,000 from business plan competitions to assist in commercializing his technology. In 2012, TITIN won $10,000 from the Under Armour Innovation Challenge. Prior to that, in early 2011, his technology also won the Most Fundable Award and Most Bankable Award at the GT Business Plan Competition and Rice Business Plan Competition, the largest business plan competition in the world. Patrick also won Outstanding Product of 2011 at Global Venture Labs in Austin, Texas. His products were also dubbed the next big thing by CNN. Such competitions also included winning first place and People's Choice Award in the GT Inventure Prize competition in 2010. Patrick led all product licensing, negotiations, marketing, product research, and development. Prior to the beginning of the development of his product, Patrick was a co-op mechanical engineer for factory automation systems for 1 year, where he designed, fabricated, documented, assembled end-of-arm tools and cell layouts, in addition to supervising on-site fabrication at EFI. Patrick graduated from Georgia Tech as a mechanical engineer in 2010. He is an accomplished high school athlete and collegiate athlete, has competed in bodybuilding contests, and has served as a personal trainer for therapy, athletic speed training, and conditioning, as well as overall fitness. So without further delay, let me turn this over to you all.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This is going to be a fun one because Patrick and I were actually talking before this started, and I was learning all sorts of new things that I didn't know about him. But one of the things that you'll note, if you were on last month, this whole concept of conversations with entrepreneurs kind of grew out of a learning experience that I had coming out of tech when I was deciding whether and where to go to business school. And, you know, everyone said, well, you ought to look at Harvard, and I just couldn't understand how this case study method would work. You know, having spent 4 years in an aerospace engineering classroom with professors teaching me formulas, the idea of just hearing other people's stories didn't seem like it would be that robust in terms of my learning. But what I came to realize after going through the case method was you probably learn and remember more when you hear other people's stories. You know, everybody talks about using other people's money, and that's important, but it's almost more important to use other people's experience. And I still, to this day, you know, remember more of the stories that I heard when I was learning about how people did things right and wrong in their business than I remember formulas that I was taught sitting in the classroom. So with that in mind, we've got Patrick Whaley with us today, and if you've been in and around tech, you've probably heard of Patrick in one form or fashion or the other. And Patrick and I met in 2010 because I was a judge for the Inventor Prize, which he ended up winning. And I just thought his story was so fascinating. But what I didn't realize, Patrick, is that your idea started long before tech.
It did.
So tell us how, Patrick was telling me he actually came up with this idea when he was like in elementary school. So, I mean, talk about a serial entrepreneur. He started when he was 5.
Yeah. Yeah, my first idea was actually artistic ladders. And so I noticed that in my neighborhood, that moms would go around and they would buy these decorative pieces to put in corners in their homes. And so I thought, well, you know, I can make something that they could put in a corner. So I went in my backyard and I started cutting down trees in the 3-foot and 5-foot sections.
Your mom loved that.
Yeah, my mom loved it, right? And then also realized that I could charge a premium if I hired their son or daughter to help design. So I started doing that, and I realized very quickly that I needed to be home before supper. Yeah. So my prime market area was only so big, and then got into a few other things. But I've always been designing and inventing from a young age. And so when I was younger, I was always a skinny kid in school. And I used to overstuff my book bag with books and do shoulder shrugs on the way to class, trying to get these massive Rocky Balboa shoulders, which didn't work. And I realized that all that does is create poor posture and a sore back. So, you know, going through that process, and again, in elementary school, I was thinking, all right, well, how do I have normal clothes that weigh more? So the next concept was, all right, why not use lead-based thread, because lead's heavy. But the problem with lead is it's poisonous.
Yeah, that's not so good.
It's not so good, because now I'd be killing off all my customers, which is a pretty bad business model. So I got to Georgia Tech, and I had this entrepreneurial itch, and I wanted to really flesh out one of my ideas, and I came up with one of my inventions, which is weighted compression gear. And started realizing that the most effective way to train is to load your body as if it's your own muscle mass. And that's what you see in front of you today with TITIN.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm laughing because Patrick's talking about loading down his backpack. You know, I have a 9-year-old son, and we walk to school every day. And anyone that's seen children walking to school today will notice that it's the parents that carry the backpacks. I'm actually the only parent that walks to school in the morning without a backpack on. And it makes me laugh because these parents are, you know, so concerned that it's too heavy for their children, they carry it. So what we should do is sell this shirt to all parents that haul these kids' backpacks around, which I still find quite funny. So Patrick ended up at Tech and he studied mechanical engineering. And, you know, one thing that's always intrigued me when I was working with the Inventor Prize is I find that students very often don't cut themselves a break. They know they want to have this big idea. They know they want to be an entrepreneur. They want to be an inventor. And in their mind, they're in this constant frantic search for that big idea. And I think a lot of people assume that the idea has to be what your major is, right? Like, oh, I'm a bioengineering student, so it's got to be some bioengineering thing. And, you know, what I always tell people is your greatest idea may have nothing to do with what you study, right? Now, I mean, hopefully you'll leverage what you studied. But, you know, you could wake up one day and say, man, this toothbrush just doesn't work for me. We should come up with a better one. So I always say, like, your greatest idea happens probably less from what you know and more from what you notice.
Yes.
So, you know, you had an experience at Tech that was fairly traumatic, but it caused you to notice this need. Right. So, you know, maybe tell a little bit about that.
I completely agree. I think innovation comes from necessity, right? Yeah. And innovation really strives and progresses from somebody that's truly passionate about it. So when it comes from a need and a passion, people will be able to succeed. And I think that's one thing that I noticed with Titan was that I was so passionate about fitness and showing people that there is a better way to train.
Right.
That no matter what obstacle came my way, I was able to overcome it.
Yeah.
But if you don't follow your passion, then obviously something's going to come up, something will arise, whether you have to get married or kids or financial issues.
There's always a reason not to do it.
Exactly. And I think especially going through Georgia Tech, you don't have free time. Right? There is no free time. There's no such thing. So
we should lobby for that.
I know, right? We need to talk to the professors about it. But you start going through school and you realize that you have to fight for every extra second. And I mean, I remember much like you, right? You go through lab and you wouldn't get home until probably 3 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. And there were times that I would just have my book bag on and I would fall right on top of my covers at 3 a.m. Yeah. And then I'd have my alarm set every morning at 6:30 a.m. to wake up to have between 6:30 and 8 a.m. to send emails to all my vendors and manufacturers trying to do samples and so forth, because that's really the only time I had during the day without classes interfering with my schedule. So getting back to that, I think people will always try to find some excuse. Right. But it's up to you to really follow your dreams and follow your ambitions, because you're your own worst enemy if you don't follow your dreams.
And you have to be aware of needs that are out there. I mean, to your point, most of us are so busy running through our day that we don't even notice the needs anymore because we're just so busy. And, I think your point about passion and need have to go together. I think so many people are passionate about what they designed as opposed to your passion should be the need. Your passion's the why, right? Exactly. Because the what could change. I mean, what you're doing at a high level hasn't changed from your original idea, but I'm sure parts of it have changed pretty drastically in terms of how you ultimately built the product.
Absolutely, or even who you sell to. Again, that comes after the why, right? So we sell a better way to train, a more effective way to train. We do that because we're passionate about fitness as a whole, right? And again, I mean, if you try to solve a problem that doesn't exist, then you're going to have a very hard time to survive.
That's a hobby.
Exactly, it's a hobby. Exactly right. If you truly find a need, then people will find a way to gravitate towards it. And more so, they find ways to gravitate towards something that they can feel a part of, right? People want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They want to gravitate towards a sense of community and camaraderie. And as you're building your company, try to focus on building a brand, right? And if you can build that community, then everything else falls into place.
And like you said, I mean, if you know there's a need, there's always going to be people that tell you it's a dumb idea, right? You can't patent that, it won't work. I mean, my good friend Sarah Blakely, who started Space and is obviously very successful, having been on the cover of Forbes, had several people tell her that's not a good idea, right? Nobody will buy that. And she just kept saying, but I have the need. There's got to be people like me. So, part of it is sort of persevering when people tell you, nah, it's not.
And that's a very good point. And it's oftentimes the individuals that are the closest to you that are the biggest naysayers. And, it's whether it's your family, your friends, your spouses, whoever it is, it's normally the individuals that are so close to you, they want to try to protect you on one side. And the other side is just individuals that are so negative that they feel like, oh, well, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And, that's where it comes down to finding a need and also following your passion. Where you can drown out all the white noise. So I try to classify all that into a bubble of white noise. And any of those naysayers, I almost use that as a catalyst, as a fuel to drive me through the hard times.
So, I mean, I think, I'm sure everyone out there, you've got your various engineering degrees, you may have graduate degrees, but your idea can come from anywhere, right? And it's just identifying that need and then, figuring out how to solve it. The other thing I think is interesting is when people describe you, they probably use, are you an entrepreneur? Are you an inventor? And I think one of the things is we get those so confused. We like to throw around words like, oh, he's creative. He's, an innovator. He's an entrepreneur. And, so I sat down one day and I was like, what do all these words mean? We're engineers, so we're not supposed to know how to, spell and do vocabulary. But, if you look it up, I think one of the key things that everybody is curious, right? And so it's that curiosity that makes you stop in your busy day and say, why is this so bad? Why does my neck hurt? Why is this hurting my posture? Why am I not getting the great muscles that I was supposed to get by carrying this bag around? And then you have creative people. They can look at the same thing as everyone else and come up with ideas, but they don't necessarily do anything about it. I know lots of creative people that are like, oh, I thought of that 20 years ago. You're like, well, you didn't do anything about it. So you have great flip charts rolled up in the corner of your office. And then you've got innovation, which I think is when you take that creativity and you add action, but then to be an entrepreneur, you have to add risk.
Yes.
And, you know, Patrick had mentioned to me earlier that he has, you know, a lot of interns that come around, and it's great because they get to experience being an entrepreneur without the risk, which means they haven't really experienced being an entrepreneur. So which would you say is your real strength? Is it your curiosity, or is it, like, did you always know that risk didn't scare you, or risk was something that could be overcome, or is that something you've had to learn to take on?
I think you're exactly right. I think the risk portion is the one deterrence from those individuals that have great ideas and those individuals that actually follow through.
Right.
And as an entrepreneur, you have to have a very high risk tolerance. Not saying that you go after—
you have to love
it. Right, doesn't mean you have to love it. And it also doesn't mean that you have to go after every risky scenario.
Go fling yourself off a cliff just for fun.
But it does mean that you have to pursue the things that others steer away from, right? And you have to be able to take a look at a situation and analyze it objectively. And you have to try to take your emotions out of it, take the passion away from that one scenario, and find the best alternative, and then put your passion back into it to drive through. And almost use your passion as a fuel, and risk is almost a steering wheel of sorts.
Which actually tech alums should be good at, because the Georgia Tech people, more than anybody I know, have this mentality of, you know, there's got to be a way.
Exactly.
Right, but to your point, you've got to isolate the risk and then say analytically, how do I get around that? Right.
Exactly.
I mean, is there a way that I can go around it, above it, under it? You know, et cetera.
I think for me personally, I think my biggest strength is just the passion and the perseverance, right? Because it takes passion, perseverance, and determination to really see your goals to fruition. And without any one of those, you're going to fail. But you have to understand that failure is not a bad thing. You learn so much more from failure than you ever will from success. You know, because I mean, in essence, take a football team, for instance. A football team could lose a game, and they'll learn, all right, well, I'm not going to do that.
That's not going to work.
Right, that's not going to work. Whereas when they start winning games, they just feel like, oh, everything's clicking. I have no idea what worked, it just worked. Right?
Do that again.
So I think that's what really drives people forward, is being able to learn from failure. And you were talking about case studies, right? And learning from other people's failures.
That's much better to learn from other people's failures than your own. It's much less painful.
Exactly. It's also much less painful to fail fast and fail forward, right? So fail when it only is a $100 mistake versus a $100,000 mistake when you get to that size. So that's definitely something that I truly try to focus on, is view failure as potential for success, but be able to analyze risk.
And do you find, since you're the passionate one that's probably naturally the optimist, if you think about the small failures that you've had along the way, because we all have them, were you the first to identify them, or did somebody else? And then you had to realize it. Because a lot of times I know for me, I'm not the first one to see it, right? Because I'm so focused on, oh, that's not a big deal. And then someone else is the one saying, wait, you need to rethink this.
Yes.
So, I mean, have you been able to surround yourself with people that can see that, or have you had to learn how to do that?
I think you're exactly right. I think that's really the missing ingredient for most businesses. You need to have almost a blind optimist that just has a vision and a goal, right? You have to have your forecast. You have to know where you're going.
My partner says I'm the yes and she's the but.
Exactly. And then you also have to have the individual that says, all right, well, I understand you want to go that way, but there might be a minor detour so we can still get there at the most cost-effective way. So for me, I'm probably the one to say, you know, I don't realize it is a failure until all other options have been exhausted.
Not failure until it's fine, right?
Exactly.
So what I put here, and we'll go through some different slides, as I was thinking about TITIN and how far you've taken it from, I mean, shoot, when you were in the Invention Prize, it wasn't even called TITIN, right? I don't think you had that name yet. And so, you know, when you think about it, I know it's overwhelming to people who have this idea, and it's almost overwhelming to say, oh my gosh, you know, how do I figure out the name, right? What is the right name? And do I do that before I get the product launched, or do I get the product launched first? Do I need a prototype, but what do I call the prototype if I don't have a name, right? So you end up in these circular arguments about, you know, when do I need money? When do I need human capital? What are the right channels to reach my customer? What is my brand? What is my product? And most people probably at that point gets overwhelmed and just quit, right? So what I thought we'd do is just kind of go through each of these and think about, like, where it was a challenge for you and what helped you overcome it. So, you know, you had the idea, you started to really test it when you were at Tech, and, you know, you went through the Inventor Prize and you won. What did that do for you? I mean, obviously it gave you some exposure, it gave you a little bit of money, but of all those things, which one did you focus on first? Like,
So for me, I always feel that finding a need is paramount, right? So it doesn't matter what you call it, right? Because that name probably will change with time.
And yours changed a couple years in, right?
It did. So, and even more so than just a brand name, what do you call the idea? What do you call the concept, right? So for us, I mean, we really view competition as the status quo. Like everything else is competition in my mind. Right. Whether it's weighted anklets, wristbands, or parachutes, or weight vests. So what do you call Titan, right? And I started really trying to analyze it as an engineer and put it in a
trying to name the category, not the product.
Exactly. Because now you need to be able to explain your idea, right? And so
everyone wants to put it in a bucket.
Exactly. They have to, and that's how people think. You have to put it in a bucket. What do I call it, right? Because you can call it a name, but the name doesn't catch until people start using it, right? So I started coming up with a Venn diagram and realized that you have weighted vests, you have thermal therapy, and then you have compression gear, and we're all three things in one, right? We're that focal point. And what does that mean? So in essence, we're weighted compression gear. So once I was able to name the category, things started to fall into place. But I didn't even start trying that until I finalized the prototype. And what is much like what we call minimum viable products, right? You have to come up with that MVP. And once you get that, now you can start testing it. You can get focus groups. You can start testing it with your friends and family. And really kind of solidifying that that concept. I remember very early on, I was told by so many people that, you know what, nobody's ever going to buy it. They have weighted vests. They have all these other things. Why would anybody buy that idea? Well, the reason is because that idea was still on paper. So nobody could really put it into a bucket. Nobody could conceptualize it because really it was only in my brain. So then I ended up going through different seamstresses trying to find a way to develop the product and got so frustrated with every seamstress telling me, oh, it can't be done. Why would you ever want to weight apparel? And I said, well, I don't pay you for an idea. I pay you to try to complete my idea.
Well, I trying to make apparel lighter and you're trying to make it heavier.
Exactly. And so, I got so frustrated that I taught myself how to sew on YouTube.
Oh, no way.
And made my first prototype and went back and said, look, I need 10 of these, right? And once that hit, I started showing athletes, right?
So even people in the industry couldn't see your idea.
They couldn't even see it, right?
Like you had to do it yourself.
Right, but then once you show it to them, now it starts to come to fruition, it comes to light, right? So people now can say, oh, well, now it starts to make sense. I can see how much better that is, right? Even in its primitive form, I can see how much better it is. And I think, for me, you always have to start with that minimum viable product. Whether it's, trying to make a prototype out of cardboard and styrofoam. But
I used duct tape when I did my prototype for Nourish.
Exactly. You have to make that first product, because you can also solve a lot of the issues, right? When you have something conceptually on paper, there's always going to be those small things that you just can't see. And then once you start conceptualizing it, putting it into reality, then you start moving forward. And I think, with the Inventor Prize, that was when it went from a hobby into a commercially viable product.
Because you had a prototype for that. Or
exactly.
You probably sewed it yourself.
And at that time, I actually used it in my rehab. So I was shot in the chest, and that was when I realized that no longer is this just for football players. I can change the way people view fitness for the better. And I noticed more improvement in using my shirt for 2 weeks than I noticed in 6 weeks of physical therapy, because I could use it every single day. I could walk around the house, I could mow the grass, I could do my laundry. I could do my normal life and have weighted compression gear help me and make that more.
Scheduling an hour with a physical therapist.
Exactly right. And so I think the Inventor Prize and that level of recognition, not only just for myself but also my family and some of the naysayers. Now all of a sudden the naysayers started getting behind me as an advocate. And so that transition was instrumental in getting this.
Which gave you some credibility with the people that were not supporting you. So you came through the Inventor Prize, and now you had something that the world was thinking, hey, there's actually a good idea. You were sewing yourself. You had seamstresses. Did you at that point? Who were your first partners? I mean, was it people that gave you money? Was it people that helped you make the product? Like, who did you bring into the fold first? And they may not still be in the fold, right? I mean, a lot of people go through those early stages and they don't end up being a long-term partner, but they serve a short-term purpose.
Sure. So I, right after the Inventor Prize, I had a college roommate that all of a sudden he went from thinking, okay, well, here's a guy just with a crazy hobby. Trying to develop.
Keep me up at night.
Keep me up at night. Exactly. And all of a sudden we won the Inventor Prize, and he said, you know what, I really want to get started with this. I want to help. And he was a business major, so try to go through that process. And much like what we've spoken about before, you have like this 3-month burn. And when people aren't making money, you know, after, you know, the first 2.5 months, they start complaining. They're like, all right, well, it's taking too much time. It's this, it's that. I thought it was going to be easier than this. And, you know, a lot of people just, you know, fall out of place. But my first partners were really, you know, failing. You know, my parents came on board at that time, and I remember my parents hated the idea of me starting a business in college. They just said, look, all we want you to do is graduate. That's all we want you to focus on. And for me, I just knew that the idea would pass me by, right? It's that inaction that would bug me more than anything else. And so as soon as we won the Adventure Prize, my dad actually came up to me and said, what do we have to do to make this a reality? So, you know, I was working time and a half at factory automation, trying to raise enough money to put in my business. And, you know, I was making probably more money than some of the mechanical engineers on staff as an intern, because I was working so hard. And, you know, the CEO of the company loved it, because I always went in and got the job done. So that was definitely something that I would consider my first partner. Was definitely my father, because that was that transitional period from a hobby into a business.
Well, and I think, you know, one of the things Patrick said, we were talking about before the webinar started, was almost every entrepreneur I know goes through this, and you'll have heartache over it, because when you start your business, you're so excited that your friends and people close to you want to be a part of it, right? They're like, oh, this is really cool. And so they'll say, you know, look, I'm between jobs, I'm happy to help, I'll just volunteer. And be very careful of that, because in your mind you're thinking, wow, that's great, you know, because I don't have money anyway, I can't even pay myself, much less somebody else. And so these people sort of join the team, and they want so badly to be part of the team, but that very same passion that got them excited starts to turn them a little sour, because then they see this big opportunity, and in their mind they're not sharing in it, right? So you know, don't be shocked and don't feel guilty, because it happens to all of us, that, you know, 3 months, 6 months into it, those very people that wanted to help start to get a little surly, and, you know, well, now I'm not getting paid, and you should give me stock, and you should give me ownership. And part of you struggles like, well, God, they did help me, right? Should I do that? But at the same time, if within a few months that's what they're feeling, they don't really want to be an entrepreneur. They want to enjoy your entrepreneurship. And so we had the same thing happen in a couple of my businesses, where the early people that came on to help were clearly not going to be a long-term part of the company, because they wanted to be the entrepreneur but have, you know, a great, they enjoyed salaries, which we didn't have at the time. So if that happens to you, don't feel guilty. It happens to all of us. So your dad came in, he brought in a little bit of money. You know, where did you start to think about, you know, in the world we live in today, there's venture capital, there's private equity, there's friends and family, there's angels, and then there's just good old-fashioned make your own money, right, which most of us do. But how did you think about all those things? Because you've had, over the life of your company, different types of capital. And what do you think are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the different types?
Yeah, so I think, you know, friends and family is fantastic in terms of the early stage. The hardest part is a lot of times they're so passionate, right? They're so passionate about it that they're going to ask you 1,000 questions, and they end up taking a lot of your time. And so, you know, my dad and I would sit at dinner tables, and we try to talk about, all right, well, here's some of the trials and tribulations that we're going through at the current moment, and you know, it almost takes away from family time and makes it into a business affair every time we meet. And that's probably the hardest part. And I remember, you know, I was very reluctant to take any money from my parents because I felt almost guilty. And so I was very sparse with, you know, when I needed help, and I was always cognizant of the fact that I need to pay him back first, so I can at least get that off my brain. I can sleep, right? And so I couldn't even get sleep at night, because I knew that I got to get my dad's money back. And I had the luxury of being able to be at Georgia Tech mechanical engineer, having an internship that also helped subsidize this hobby I was trying to commercialize. And I think early on, always try to make your own money, whether it's your own credit cards, whether it's working overtime, whatever it is. That is the first piece that you have to do. You have to prove it to yourself first, that you can do it by yourself. Then when other people come on board, you already have so much confidence that now when you speak with them, you can say, look, I really believe that this is the way we need to go, and this is how I'm going to use it. Because I've already failed on my own money. I don't want to fail with yours. And I think that's very instrumental with bringing any money on. So you have to show failure, you have to show that you've learned something, so that you can say your money's at less risk. Then you start looking at angels, right? And those are mainly like friends or friends with neighbors, that, you know, educated investors of sorts that want to come in and give you a little bit more money. And they're not really looking for a quick return, but they are looking for liquidity.
In you.
Exactly. They're looking for liquidity somewhere down the road, but they don't need instant returns. And then you start getting into the VC realm, and that's a whole another ball of wax, right? So for me, I think I started looking at that differently. So I went through the Ventureprise and very quickly realized that when you have an award with that much recognition, I started having attorneys at the time that now wanted to come back to me and say, well, I did all this pro bono work for you, now here's an invoice. Right. And I said, well, I thought you were working and helping me out. I thought this was a pro bono thing. Well, now that you've made money, I know how much money you've made. I need the invoices paid. So that was very hard because now the money that I already allocated in my mind for new products went elsewhere. So then you get into the business plan competitions. You start developing a business plan and realize how much money you actually need. Right. And that was...
You might win $50,000, but you spent $49,000.
Exactly. How much money you actually need. And so I went through the Georgia Tech business plan competition. I ended up being the most fundable, and then progressed on to the Rice University business plan competition, the largest in the world, and 1.6 million advisors that ever competed. And BBVA Compass dubbed me the most bankable. So here's a bank, and now dubbing me the most bankable, which is fantastic. So you go through those and you start realizing, all right, I need money, right? I need this amount of money to make this 3-year plan.
You need money to make money. It kind of stinks.
Yeah, it really stinks, doesn't it? And at that point, you start speaking with judges and individuals, much like when I was speaking with you from the Ventureprise. And they say, look, I know that you're planning on you needing X. You're probably going to need twice that, and it's going to take you twice the amount of time you actually think it's going to plan out. And so you start going through those iterations, and it's really, really hard to find an investor that not only believes in you, but also believes in your vision. And I think that's paramount.
And has the same time horizon.
Exactly.
Because I always tell people, you have to have the right source of capital at the right time for the right use. All dollars are not equal.
Exactly.
And the fact that someone's excited about your idea and wants to give you money doesn't mean you should take it.
Exactly.
Because, they may, in their minds, want a return in 4 years.
Exactly.
And to your point, you may think it's going to take 3, and that seems great, but what if it takes 6? What happens in year 4? And what happens is the angel starts to look a little bit more like the devil.
Yes. Exactly, because now they want their return in their own time frame.
Right.
And their time frame may not align with yours.
Right.
And that's you're exactly right.
And your time frame could have changed, right? I mean, you started with one idea for Titan in terms of the problem it was solving, but over the course of time, you've identified other problems. And so you may want to invest in growing that product line, and then here's a person that's like, well, I wanted my return tomorrow,
Exactly.
So how do you kind of balance that? So of course Patrick gets some money, gets the angels involved, and so last year at this time, we're coming up on Halloween, you were on Shark Tank. And everybody I meet watches Shark Tank, right? And when they hear a good business idea, it's become the fastest thing you hear said. People are like, that's a great idea, you should go on Shark Tank, right? So did people tell you that? How did you end up on Shark Tank?
Oh my gosh,
and were you dying to be on TV, or was it a necessary evil?
I can't tell you how many times. I mean, it was everybody. Everybody you meet. Yeah, that's such a great idea. You should be on Shark Tank. And you don't realize what that means until you go through it. And some of the trials and tribulations I had up until that point. I had a VC out of London that I met, and talking about smart money versus other kinds of money. I don't even want to specify it, but you start going into these timetables. And you come up with an agreement at the time of closing. And I had a VC group out of London that started misappropriating funds, and basically almost $500,000, half the investment they put in was misappropriated.
Well, because one thing, and I mean, misappropriated sounds, my dad's in the criminal justice business, that sounds bad, but I think even unintentionally, I've had venture capitalists, private equity groups that'll come in and say, well, we want to give you this much money, but they have in their mind how they think you should spend it, right? And that may not be how you think you should spend it. But it's funny, when you have a lot of money in your pocket, you're willing to spend it ways you didn't think, right? I always would rather have less money in my pocket, because then I don't spend on things I shouldn't. Right. But all of a sudden you have this extra money and you're like, well, I wasn't going to do that marketing billboard, but what the heck, I've got it.
Yeah.
And so I hear more times from people that have that venture money is all of a sudden they think they know how you should run your business. Right. And so they might tell you, let's put this much into marketing or sales or whatever, and if that's not really the best way to spend the money, then at the end of the day, it gets spent the wrong way, right? So it's not just bad people that misappropriate. It could be good people, but not with your mission.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, they ended up, kind of holding us back, halting the growth of the business, and I ended up basically firing everybody in the company and built the business from where it was.
They had put people in the company too. So I mean, from a control perspective, you were losing control.
Exactly, because they were beholden to the individuals that brought them to the table. So I let go of everybody. I sold a $2.5 million contract to the military special forces. I went back to my investors and said, look, I need to be able to finance this. And we need more money to be able to finance it to sell to the military. And they basically told me, that's fantastic, but we just want your intellectual property. So we'll forgive all the loan notes and everything else, and we just want your intellectual property, and you can go about your way. And at that point, I realized I needed to stand up for my idea. And I built the business off of Facebook, growing it from about a $10,000 a month business to $1 million a month in 7 months.
Wow.
And we had our $1 million a month. I sold out of all my inventory, and that was the month before filming for Shark Tank. So I ended up 2 days before we filmed. I bought out my investors with the money that I used that I was able for sales, right? The money that I generated off the sales revenue. I bought them out and ended up going on Shark Tank.
You're basically starting over.
Starting over, and so I'm 2 days fresh, and actually
you were a startup twice. Same business.
I know, right? So I ended up going on Shark Tank, and funny story, right? Now, I don't think anybody knows this. I don't know if I've told anybody, but the day before, I was so I don't even know how to phrase it. Like my mindset was just completely raw because I just got one investor out, and now I'm going almost out of the frying pan into the fire. It felt like. So I went to the beach with the guy that went on set with me, who was one of my sales guys, and went to the beach. We started working out in Muscle Beach, and I got a sunburn, right? So I'm a redhead. Here I am walking on set with a sunburn, and they're trying to put makeup on me, trying to cover the sunburn. And now I have weighted compression gear on top of this sunburn.
And you're glowing, so there you go.
Just glowing, right? So it's great for TV. So, and then right before we walk on, right before the doors open up, I ended up selling $4,000 worth of products to the executive producer, the camera crew. I mean, I had people buying on their cell phones and tablets and iPads right behind scenes. And so I'm jazzed up. I'm like, even though I got a sunburn, I just sold $4,000 worth of products in 30 minutes. I'm going to walk on, I'm going to own this. And so I walked on set, and that wasn't the case. You get on set, and you stand there for about 10 to 30 seconds.
And I'm sure the hot lights were great for your sunburn.
Fantastic, right? And so I'm standing on set, you can't say anything, and then I start my pitch, and right away, Mark Cuban just wasn't having it. I guess he was having a bad day, something hit him the wrong way, wasn't having it, didn't like it. But then, Damon John and Kevin O'Leary loved the product, loved the idea, loved that I was making money. So, here I am, the month before I filmed, I just sold $1 million in a month. I have great margins. I have wholesale accounts that are growing exponentially. Our online e-commerce is growing exponentially, and that was something that was very appealing to Mr. Wonderful. And so the other thing that I noticed is that the entire time, Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, is the nicest guy. He was the nicest guy in the entire cast. But for some reason, they took our 2 hours of filming, right? So they filmed us for 2 hours, took our 2 hours of filming and cut it down to the most dramatic 8 minutes possible, and cut out all the niceties that Mr. Wonderful said. And you'll notice that when I left, I turned around to Kevin O'Leary and I said, you really are Mr. Wonderful. And he goes, I know that with certainty. I was like, oh, but they're going to keep that one. They're going to cut everything else out, but they're going to keep that one. So between that and Damon John loved the product because, he trained in a weight test. And he knew the detrimental effects. He knew exactly. He knew the need, and he understood my why. Right? Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because there's a better way to train. Right? And if you
That's interesting that your investor needs to understand your why. Everyone else is criticizing your what.
Exactly. Right? And that's what you need to align yourself with. I think trying to culminate that into who do you look for money. You have to find somebody that not only believes in you but believes in your why, believes in your vision and your purpose.
And so, I mean, obviously, everyone says you should go on Shark Tank. There's the huge benefit that comes with that, the exposure, orders, although you had no inventory, but orders are great. what are the downsides? Did it take a lot of your time? Was it like, how did you run the business while you were doing that? And then coming out of it, with all that growth on the heel of a $1 million month, how did you scale? Like, because it could have been a negative, right?
Yeah.
It could kill you.
It could, and that was something that I think I learned almost on my own. And I think that, Damon John, when he invested in me, saw that and realized that, here's a guy that understands that fast growth is almost more detrimental than no growth at all.
Mm-hmm.
We grew 100-fold in 7 months and ran out of inventory. And those trials and tribulations help mold you as an entrepreneur into a successful CEO,
sure.
right? And I think
it also shows all the weaknesses in your system.
Exactly. And I think those weaknesses are things that he saw that he could solve.
Yeah.
And so he also partnered us up with Samsung, which acts as our 3PL and so forth. And so in that process, you have between filming and when you actually air, you have a few months to kind of get ready, get your website ready,
right.
Because inevitably your website will crash.
Right.
And you have to be ready to overcome that. And I remember talking to different web designers and servers. We ended up shifting from our GoDaddy interface into our Amazon hosting. And I remember talking with the programmers and the servers, and I said, look, there's going to be a massive surge, and we have to be ready for it. And they said, oh, it can withstand X amount of, like 100,000 hits in a minute. And I said, well, we need to be able to withstand 100,000 hits in a second.
Yeah.
We're only on for 15 minutes, and most of the individuals will be on within the first 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. And so that level of exposure sometimes can really bankrupt you as a business. But if you can anticipate that, and mitigate your risk and say, look, I'm not going to buy 100,000 units, but maybe I'll buy 30,000 just to get ready for it, then you can try to mitigate that risk. And if you do oversell, it's not a bad problem.
You have to set expectations.
Exactly.
Right?
Then you can
have it tomorrow.
Exactly. Say, look, I sincerely appreciate your support, and we'd love to have you. I'm going to actually refund your shipping if you're willing to wait for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is.
Idea. Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you have a loyal customer that's an advocate. Oh my gosh, they sold out in a matter of minutes, and now I have to wait for my product. So that was actually almost a blessing in disguise because now people understood the demand.
Right. So, you obviously went through the trials and tribulations of starting the business, but now your whole focus is scale. And which one do you think is harder, starting it or scaling it?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I think they both have their issues, but I definitely think scale is probably the hardest.
Right.
Starting it, there's always ways that you can easily solve it, right? When you get started, a lot of what you need to overcome are the naysayers, the adversity and the trials and tribulations that you have from a startup. But those are $100 problems or $20 problems. When you start scaling, especially when you start getting to a million plus a month, you really start having these, $10,000 issues. And, that was the benefit with Now Account. Was now I had invoices that came in with net terms from a Dick's Sporting Goods or an Academy Sports or an Amazon that wanted net terms. And at the time, I'm sitting there going, I can't even fund new inventory, right? Like as soon as I sell it,
net 30, I can't have net tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. So it's almost as if I went from basically saying, look, I don't offer net terms. The only time I ship is when I get payment, and then I'll ship either today if I can or tomorrow.
And the big guys won't buy from you.
The big guys, exactly. The big guys won't do it. And I remember I reached out to you right after I was approached by Dick's Sporting Goods, and they wanted net terms. And I said, look, I can't do this. I can't find a way to financially.
And there's not a more painful realization than to have to say no to a customer.
It was so hard. And I mean, they gave us a purchase order. I think it was back in July of last year. It was before Shark Tank, it was before all that stuff. So not only did I need to ramp up for Shark Tank, which was the biggest risk when I sat down with you, is I said, look, not only am I trying to ramp up for Shark Tank, but I'm also having to ramp up to facilitate a Dick's Sporting Goods order. And when we talked, that was something that we could solve with Now Account, which was fantastic because now I could take an invoice and take the net terms and turn that into an immediate cash transaction, much like a credit card.
And I'm assuming you stopped sewing yourself at this point.
So very quickly,
I still want a picture of him behind a sewing machine doing his own sewing, but So at the same time all this is going on where you're getting orders and, you know, you've got to find capital, you also have to find new vendors, right? Because I'm assuming you were no longer sewing.
Yes. Yeah. So when you grow that fast, you quickly outgrow your vendors.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to account for that. It's almost like you have to forecast it out. So even when you have a vendor, you need to look at, all right, where's the next one, right? What's the maximum output you can do, and what's the maximum output you can do with the quality I need? Because those are two different output equations, right? Because sometimes they can say, look, I can make 20,000 pieces a month, but I can only make 15,000 pieces with the quality standards that you need. And so you need to be able to analyze that and be able to move.
So how do you anticipate those?
I mean, I developed this 5 name list, and at the time I was asking my family and friends, what do you think of this name? What do you think of this name? And at the time it was so frustrating. After a month into it, my family and friends were like, Patrick, look, I really like this one name. So we kept coming back to the name TITIN.
Yeah.
And so the name TITIN actually came from the longest protein found in your body, which acts as a molecular spring. So now I have my science kind of mindset, and so look, now I satisfy the science mindset, but I also have kind of the Greek mythology phonetically of Titans, which are the founders of Zeus, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's cool because I had someone tell me one time that your brand should reflect your attitude, not the what you do, right? Like Nike, just do it. If they could make chairs tomorrow, and it would still be that same mentality of just do it.
Exactly. You need to find a brand. You're exactly right. You need to find a brand that encompasses your why. Exactly. And you have to be able to advocate a feeling and a compassion, and allow people to gravitate towards you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're here today, and we've got just 1 or 2 more slides, and then we'll open it up for questions. But you've built out this brand. You're selling on the web, so you've got that direct business. But now you've got other channels, right? You have bricks and mortar. You've got affiliates, which you'll tell us about here shortly. You've got athletes endorsing it. You're working with people like me, but you're also selling to pro athletes or even pro teams or college teams. So how do you think about all those different channels and manage them all? And I've got a picture here. This is Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Yep. So now Dick's is promoting your product. Yeah. And you got to keep the story consistent. Yes. You've got to,
Yeah, brand messaging is key. And I think that that is your number one goal as entrepreneur, is to make sure that your brand messaging is clear and concise. Otherwise, you're just going to confuse the marketplace. And again, it goes back to the why. You have to show people why you do what you do, so that they can gravitate towards you. And very early on, I remember doing some research on marketing and how to grow the business with all the business plan competitions, and quickly realized that colleges are almost the hub of all research, and it's almost a tentacle effect, right? So professional athletes gravitate back towards their college that they came from. So like an Eddie Lacy goes back to Alabama to train. A Michael Jenkins would go back to his original college. Right. Peyton Manning would train with the University of Tennessee. Right. So if you end up selling to the college, you can now get into the pros. Almost organically. That's cool. In addition, high schools will look to the colleges for advice.
Inspire,
yeah, rather than pro teams, because they think, oh, pro teams have so much money, I can't spend that kind of money. But with the college, it's attainable. Right. High schools can say, all right, well, if the college does it, I should look into it.
Right.
So I very quickly realized that to grow this brand and to grow it immensely, I need to sell to the college market, and then that will spread the brand to the pros and down to the high school level as well.
Right, right. And so when you think about it, and I'll pull up his website in just a second, it's titintech.com, but you talked about how important the brand was. You talked about both manufacturing domestic and abroad, and how you manage all that. We've talked about human capital, having the right partners at the right time. How has your role changed as the founder?
I think
probably begrudgingly, but yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, because when you're the founder, you're the entrepreneur, you have to identify your weaknesses, and that's going to be the one success that you will have that will trump everything else. Because if you can't identify your own weaknesses, you're never going to be able to get out of your own way. Yeah. So for me, I realized that, yes, I'm an optimist, right? I am a numbers guy, but I don't love doing that, right? When it comes to the operations, I was really looking for somebody with white hair that could come in and be able to...
And not sunburn.
Yeah, not sunburn, right. That could come in and really analyze the numbers unbiasedly, right? And I could tell him, look, here's my vision, this is where I want to go. And he can say, all right, well, let's kind of take a step back to earth and figure out what we do.
Right.
And so early on, I went from kind of being the jack of all trades to evolving into an advocate, evolving into the spokesperson
Laura, can you hear me? I think we're coming back online from what I can see. I see the microphone sort of populating, and if Laura, you can hear me, yes, so sorry. I do not know what happened. I think we had Cisco completely went down on us. I've never had that happen before.
We still have the microphone on our end, so
and I could see that you had some talk. I know. I hope that it was only for
great conversation. About talking amongst yourselves.
I do apologize, and it has been fantastic. In fact, I've gotten some very nice chat compliments while we've been silent. I also do have, for those, and we have a number of people still online, so I do have a question actually for Patrick. What are you doing to build leadership skills in the individuals who will help you to grow your business?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you have to find those individuals that already exhibit leadership skills from the onset so that you can mold them into the leader that you need them to be. Because otherwise you end up spinning your wheels on trying to create a leader and then create them into the leader you need them to be. So what I've noticed is that you have to surround yourself with A players. And if you can't afford the A players, you probably don't deserve to be in that space. So always focus on surrounding yourself with people that are better than you at the role you need them to fill. And if you do that, then you'll always find a way to succeed.
Fantastic. Any other questions out there? Now that we can answer in our best format.
I know if it was going to rely on my typing in chat, we were going to be in trouble.
No, I was glad to do it, but I was getting a little nervous.
Yeah. You know, there's a really good question that we were talking about offline, which is what are some of the hardest decisions that you've had to turn away? You know, once you start to work fast, what are some of the hard things that you've had to decide? And I think for me and from my standpoint, some of the hard things were turning away new product lines. So we have our TITIN series, which is our kids line for
which I keep begging for.
And you know, in our business plan, we have it to grow into the kids line. But when you're struggling to facilitate the growth of your current product lines, you need to focus on that product line and get it rolling and purring, and almost like a well-oiled machine before you expand into anything else. And so that was probably one of the hardest decisions, was turning away business for our kids line. Yeah. Now, what we did end up doing was developing custom units. So we ended up developing custom units for individuals and parents that want a TITIN version for their son or daughter. And that way we can facilitate the immediate need while we continue to grow our current product lines. And then down the road, we can get into the TITIN and our kids line down the road.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. Let's see, also in regards to sort of leadership, when did you or have you realized that you're less of an entrepreneur and more of a leader of an organization?
Good question.
That is a very good question. I think from my standpoint, you have to be a leader inherently first. I think first and foremost, you have to be able to lead a group and be able to inspire. And if you can't inspire others, then you need to find kind of that face of your brand. You need to find somebody that can inspire others not only to join the team, but also be those biggest advocates for you outside of your own team. So if you find yourself as one of those introverted entrepreneurs, that's fine. There's always a need. But definitely surround yourself with somebody that can be that advocate, that can be the spokesperson, and inspire others to gravitate towards your cause.
And one thing I would say too, that is one of the harder things about being a founder is if you are that person that's sort of the outward voice of the brand of the company, you find yourself out of the office more than in. And so I joke that there are days that I drive by my office 4 times, I just don't actually come inside because I'm going from meeting to meeting or presentation to presentation. And it's really hard to inspire people when you're not there. So again, finding people that can sort of be that opposite, that can be in the office daily but still have that, those leadership skills because you're so busy trying to build it that you realize you're not, you got to be there for your people, otherwise you're not very useful.
Agreed. I completely agree. I think you're exactly right. You have to have somebody, and again, it gets back into surrounding yourself with those A players. And if you can have somebody that's in the office that can, carry that message while you're gone, so that when you get back, you can kind of refill that goblet, so to speak, refill the bucket. And it's always hard. It's always hard to find the right people. And that 80-20 rule really comes into play. And you have to be able to realize very quickly whether somebody is a good fit or not. Because negativity is like a disease. You need to cut it like gangrene.
And I think we all tend to try to find people exactly like us. But that can be a challenge too, because everybody can't be the same thing. And so then you're stepping on top of each other as opposed to finding somebody that is like you in the most important areas. They're like you in character. They're like you in, their passion. They're, playing their role, but that they can be themselves. Because you don't need a bunch of mini-me's running around. I mean, we all have our own weaknesses, and I know for sure you don't need more of mine running around.
I agree.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. So I'm considerate of your time. Patrick, Laura, is it okay? Just go ahead and get these answered too? Okay. All right. So Patrick, how much addressable market size did angel investors expect while you were raising seed capital? It says, for example, Y Combinator expects your total addressable market to be $1 billion.
I'm trying to find a way to answer. I think when you start talking with angel investors or any type of investor for that matter, market size is always fantastic. But I remember, there's somebody I was speaking with, and it might have been Laura actually, saying you never want to go from the top-down approach when you try to advocate your business. You never want to say, all right, the market size is X billions of dollars. If I only get 1% of it, then we're doing well. Because you're looking at it wrong. It's almost like you want to have the top-down approach as a gut check, saying, all right, well, there is an opportunity here, but you really need to develop the market from the bottom up. Say, I know I can sell to this group. I know I can sell to this vertical. I know I can sell to this individual, this demographic, and build that market from the bottom up and say, look, if I can sell to this group and this group and this group and build upon that, then we can become this percentage of the market. I think that's a much better way to advocate your success, and people are much more likely to get onto that success.
It's actually a trick question because, of course, people want big, so they're going to say our minimum is X billion. But I think it's a little bit of a trick question because you're right, Patrick. They want to know that you know what your market is. And every investor out there knows you can make a ton of money on a massive industry. And you know what? You can make a ton of money on a niche market too. But the reason they're asking is that they don't want you to come in and say, oh, well, I'm going to dominate the world, right? I mean, this is about world domination through search. What they want to know is that you've been thoughtful about it, that you've researched it, that you know exactly what your target market is and how big it is and how you might get a meaningful or maybe not a meaningful piece of it. And of course, yes, they do like big because they want to see that there's room to grow. But I think what most investors also know is the target market that you set out to go after is not ultimately your market, right? It may be the stepping stone to another market or a bigger market, or you may at some point pivot into. I mean, you could have taken this into the medical space and forget sports altogether, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I hear that so many times, well, if I don't have $1 billion market, I can't go after it. And I'm like, good God. I mean, the world is full of highly successful entrepreneurs that don't have $1 billion markets, but they know their market really well. So
they're able to capitalize on that niche.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. Are you still partnered with the Shark Tank investors? What was or is the exit strategy, and can you give their terms or typical terms of venture capital?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes, we're still involved with the Shark Tank investor. It was actually Damon John, and we are still working with him. And in terms of venture capitals, venture capitalists for that matter, VCs will always try to look for the valuation, what money in versus what money you have as post-money valuation. And it really kind of varies. It varies upon the management team you have. It varies upon your forecast, it varies upon how much money you actually need to get there. And then again, I mean, it's that SWOT analysis. All right, well, yes, you have a fantastic market, but what are the players in that market? Who are the biggest players, and how do you overcome the obstacles? How do you become a niche to inspire a brand? And that's what they look for. VCs always want to look for internal rate of return. They want to be able to have liquidity in 3 to 5 years. So typically, when we start talking about a VC firm, they have to have liquidity down the road. That's the only way they make money.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to it, you have to be able to analyze. All right, this is their timeline and this is mine. Because if you don't have matching timelines, you're always going to have that adversity.
Yeah. And Caroline, I ask you another question too about how do you decide who's part of your inner circle, and how do you feel the need to safely blow off steam or think creatively? And that is such a great question because, you know, it's hard when you start a business. Your business starts out as a family, really. I mean, you're really close to those people. You live with them every day, and you start to share things that, you know, in your mind, it's a good thing, right? It's an open environment. Everybody knows what's going on in the company. But at the same time, it's like being on a ship. When the captain starts to get nervous, we should all get nervous, right? I mean, you know, when I'm on a ship and I'm nervous, that's my question is, are you nervous? Because you're the captain. If you're good, we're all good. And so it is hard to pick who you can really show your ups and downs. And the reality is there are ups and downs, and you're going to have frustrating days, and you have to have somebody to blow that off. And arguably, to be honest, it should be outside your company.
Yes.
What I did early on is I put together a personal board of directors that is not my company's board of directors. The company's board of directors care about the company. They don't give a flying flip, or they shouldn't, about me and my, you know, like, am I having a good day? What they care about is the company. But if you have a personal board of directors, make sure you can find 2, 3, 5, it doesn't matter how many, but it should not be your parents, because your parents will always tell you you're great, and that's good. It should not be your best friend, because when you're having a bad day, they want to pat you on the back and tell you it'll be okay, and it might not. And so you got to find people that you trust them enough that they'll be honest with you, but you want them to tell you, you know, Laura, you're being an idiot. Like, pull it together and move on, right? Like, this is not a big deal. You don't care about this. So stop freaking out. So, you know, find somebody that maybe you've met through business, ideally maybe even not in your industry, so that they don't bring their own emotions to the table and their own biases, but they can just listen to your story and say, that makes no sense to me.
Right.
You know, so I don't know about how you've done
that's
that.
actually something that we've recently gone through, especially growing as fast as we did. You know, going from a one-man SWAT team to now bringing on the first few key hires to now growing into a larger group. You end up transitioning from the friend zone, so to speak, where you kind of, you know, let out some steam with your own internal staff, to now all of a sudden you're growing to a point where you need to isolate yourself as a leader and have that positive energy, positive front to inspire others internally. And again, have individuals that are outside of your own business or your own industry that you can count on, almost as a board of advisors. And that's definitely something that I actually used Laura on multiple times in the past, and it was instrumental in terms of my psyche. You know, getting from where I was to being able to vent to somebody that has been there, that's done that before, regardless of whether they're in the industry or not. Business is business, and you can always learn from other people as well.
Unfortunately, your spouse will also play that role. You should warn them.
Well, y'all, it's about 15 after 1, and I thank you all. Laura, Patrick, this has been such a treat. Obviously, we've had a great group stick around until this time, and I appreciate it so much, you bearing with me on the technology issues. I will research that. That has never happened before, but we will certainly get to the bottom of it and not have it happen again. So thanks so much to you both for leading this program, and for everybody who participated. Really thank you for hanging in there and enjoying it with me.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
All right. Y'all have a nice day, okay?
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.